Thank you, David. Am I mic'd up here, I hope? Good? Okay. Thank you for that kind introduction. And let me see, I got my PowerPoint here. Everyone can see that. Great. The theme of today's State of the Culture talk is living as an individualist in a collectivist world. And what I want to start by doing is to frame this discussion by making a couple of observations about what the challenge I'm going to be wrestling with in this talk, and frankly the challenge that we all have to wrestle with throughout our lives. Now, I want to start by saying that, reminding us that the principal purpose of the objectivist philosophy, and I would say any philosophy worth studying and applying to one's life, is to guide us in living a happy, flourishing life. And specifically, Objectivism advocates a philosophy of individualism. Now, while many people are attracted to Objectivism and the philosophy of Ayn Rand through Atlas Shrugged, which has, of course, a very heavy political and economic emphasis, the first point of the philosophy is not to create a better society, but to create a better you. Think Howard Roark in The Fountainhead. Of course, philosophy is intimately connected with politics and economics and with the culture. A better society, of course, is predicated on having the right philosophy. Indeed, it is a direct result of the underlying philosophy that we have the politics and the economics and the government and the culture that we have today. Now, a true individualist, of course, also wants to live in a certain kind of society with certain kinds of individuals. So, again, it's not a matter of some of disinterest. And what we want, of course, is a society that both has freedom that allows us to be free, and a society in which we have sort of our kind of people, meaning productive achievers. We'll talk about that in a little bit here. And of course, politics is a manifestation of the philosophy, and in this case, as I'm going to show you in a few minutes, a very, very bad philosophy. Further, it is a reality that all of us are formed and influenced by our culture. In other words, ideas, values, priorities, expectations are all communicated to us and to our fellows in so many subtle and not so subtle ways, through television, through newscasts, through classrooms, through churches, through interaction with other people. And of course, in society, we tend to form habits. That is, we have, as it were, concretized in our very nature, in our moral habits, the philosophy of a society, which may or may not be particularly good. Now, what I'm going to do today is talk a little bit about the, I should probably forward, sorry about that. What I'm going to do today is talk about the individualist challenges in a collectivist culture. And let me move to that slide. First, I want to review very quickly the current dismal state of the economy and of politics. I always like to be inclusive, and of course that will no doubt depress you. Then what I'm going to do is remind us about the nature of true individualism, and then kind of comes the meat of the talk, and that is I'm going to take those principles of individualism and I'm going to review what's going on in the culture right now. What values are in fact being manifest in the culture, which is what underlies, of course, our politics and economics. And then I'm going to offer some tips about you as an individual and how you can live better in this culture, and indeed how we can hopefully spark a second renaissance and actually change that culture. So let me start with the dismal landscape. Sorry to be a downer here to begin the talk, but it'll get better, I promise you. Okay, let's take a look right now at the state of what most people think of as society. Let's take a look at government, and the state of government right now is pretty abysmal. Since I last spoke to you about a year ago, Obamacare is, of course, has been passed, and with the last election, having not elected Republicans who promised to stop Obamacare, it's scheduled to go into effect a little bit later this year. This is 2013 for those listening perhaps on an audio here. And of course, Obamacare basically controls about 1/6 of the economy, but worse, it controls many intricate aspects of our lives and is going to influence our decisions. It's not just a matter of economics. So things are pretty bad there. Arbitrary government regulations, more and more, are the tool de jour for how statists are restricting our liberties. Obama is going to be hard-pressed to push certain kinds of legislation anymore. So what he's using is executive orders. For example, recently, White House advisor on the environment, Daniel Schrag, said that a war on coal is exactly what we need. And the president has said he's going to use his executive authority to basically do everything he can to stamp out coal in this country. Not voted on by Congress, not voted on by the people. He's going to use executive authority to do that. I saw recently, by the way, where the Food and Drug Administration is again going to claim jurisdiction over cigarettes. You know, you might say that's a small sort of thing, but again, it kind of gives you an idea of the threat from government regulations. The Food and Drug Administration is supposed to certify the safety and efficacy of food and of medical medicines and medical devices. Well, what the hell does that have to do with tobacco? Well, nothing, because tobacco is not a medication. It makes no health claims. It's something you smoke. And some years ago, the FDA tried to do this by saying that a cigarette is actually a medical device in the same category as heart valves. It's a nicotine delivery device that can be regulated by the government. And of course, this was pretty laughable. Congress actually considered whether it should give FDA authority to oversee cigarettes. It decided it was not going to do that. But the FDA has said, well, we got Obama in there, so we're going to just go ahead and try to do that anyway. So regulations are the tool de jour to how to repress us and take away our freedom. Of course, we all know the scandals about surveillance and our and intrusions on privacy. Tracking phones. I noticed, by the way, a couple of jurisdictions, some scandals are emerging about them tracking license plates, where they're actually trying to see where exactly you drive at any given time. What the hell does that have to do with a government supposed to, basically protect us from, criminals and so forth? I mean, they can make a very broad argument that, well, we have to keep track of everybody to make sure no one's a criminal, but you can see what's happening here. And of course, we all know about the IRS scandals and basically government just simply using its political power to crush people with which it disagrees. The public reaction, by the way, to these abuses has been very promising. But still, that's the situation of the government today. Pretty dismal. Politics. Do I get politics? Yeah, again, pretty dismal. Democrats, I would argue that 30, 40 years ago, most Democrat elites probably believed in private property and free markets, but they believed that we needed a welfare state to have a safety net, and we needed to tweak the economy because, they're so-called market failures. I would say today most of the Democrat elites are simply socialists, in everything but name. They literally have this, it's an urge to control. And that's what they're doing. They want to control literally from cradle to grave. There's nothing they don't want to control. And so that party is pretty much lost. What about the GOP? Well, not a whole lot better. Of course, the GOP right now is having a internal civil war between three factions. The establishment faction, which basically people like Mitt Romney and John McCain, who believe in the welfare state and the current regime. They just want to make it work a little bit better. And then you have more libertarianish types like, sort of in the Reagan Goldwater tradition, who actually do want to really limit government. And then you have the social conservatives, your Huckabees and your Santorums, who actually want the government to be more aggressive in controlling our lives. And these folks put things like gay marriage and that sort of thing up as a priority. So the party is not doing very well there. The party is on a demographic death spiral. Romney only got 27% of the Hispanic vote, which is down from Bush's 44% approximately. But the Hispanic portion of the population, 17% now, is going to be 30% by 2050. By the way, I'm not advocating that we basically give entitlements to Hispanics or anyone else for that matter, but anyway, the point is that the Republicans are not picking up that vote, and so this nominal limited government party is heading in the wrong direction. What about white non-Hispanics? Romney picked up 59% of white non-Hispanics, but again, 64% of people today are white non-Hispanics, but that's down from 76% in 1990, and that's on the decline as well. What about the youth vote? How did Romney do there? 37%, which is down from Bush's take. The interesting thing is that 78% of white evangelicals went for Mitt Romney. And I say, well, at least he's got those guys wrapped up. Isn't that great? Well, the point is the up-and-coming generation are overwhelmingly not white evangelicals. Only 12% of the 18 to 29-year-old voters consider themselves evangelicals. So again, if you look at the demographics, you look at the polling information, you see that the nominal limited government party, which is not very limited government most of the time anymore, is kind of in a death spiral. The economy, well, I don't have to waste too much time on that because we know what a waste that is. Economic stagnation, purchasing power has actually gone down, and I was going to put a big section on the income and all, but I decided that, you know, it's early in the morning. I didn't want to put you guys to sleep, but the income gap really is growing, by the way. It's not an illusion. Not that we care about gaps so much, but it's a purchasing power going down that really is the problem. And of course, we see the crisis of the welfare state continuing abreast. That is, there's just not enough loot to steal. Government officials, the welfare state simply can't go on as it is, but that's the situation we're in. Okay, so I've given you kind of a pretty depressing start to this discussion. But now what I want to do is this. I want to step back for a minute, and of course I've suggested that the politics, government, and so forth is a reflection of deeper values of individualism versus collectivism. And what I want to do is refresh your memory real quickly on what those values and virtues of individualism actually are. So let's start off with the first premise, is that your life is your highest value. That is the measure of, you know, what, or that's what you should be aiming at, a life of flourishing and a life of, number two, productive achievement. Because that's how we as human beings survive. We produce the goods and services as well as the spiritual fuel that we need that makes life worthwhile. That the guide to a happy and prosperous life is reason. And by the way, I want to make a little a note here about reason. I'm not talking. A lot of people think of reason as a sort of a very narrow, almost rationalistic tool, but I'm talking about reason in the broadest sense, which includes self-reflection, self-analysis, etc. It's very important to understand that, especially when we get to the section on how's reason looking in our culture today, which unfortunately is not so good. Next, I put in this integrity and a philosophy of life. In other words, when we talk about having our life as a value, when we talk about achievement, and when we talk about the use of reason, we're talking about it in an integrated life. We're talking about having a philosophy of life that helps guide us as we meet the challenges of life. We're always going to meet challenges. Things are going to always change for us, life situations, etc. And so it's having that underlying philosophy that allows us, or allows any individual, to meet the challenges and to continue to reach the goal of fulfillment and happiness, as opposed to someone who's kind of has disintegrated, well, I have this feeling here and this belief there and this opinion over here, and it's kind of a mess. So very important for living a happy, productive life is having an integrated philosophy. And finally, I wanted to mention justice and benevolence. We deal with others based on mutual consent rather than the initiation of force. That's the way we should be doing it in society. Reason as a tool to persuade other people. I would also add spiritual justice is very important. That is to say, when we deal with people, we're not just talking about trading and not cheating them, but we're talking about spiritual justice, where we're giving them their due. We're appreciating and admiring achievement. And of course, on the other side, denouncing things that we don't think are very nice. And that if you have this kind of view of individualism, This is the true individualism, and this relation between how individuals should deal with one another. And then, of course, you're going to come to the conclusion that government should be limited. Government should protect the rights of each individual, right? So that's individualism, sort of a very short summary. Now, getting to kind of the meat of the talk today, let's take a look at the cultural landscape in terms of these factors that I've just discussed. And let's see how the culture today lines up, okay? And here I can, since I started out by giving you a look at a very dismal landscape, I can actually say some very nice things, okay? Let's take a look at self-esteem and a sense of life when we're supposed to transcend ourselves, okay? This is the self-esteem thing. The good news, there is good news, in fact, concerning the goals that most Americans have today. Americans are still self-oriented by and large, but they're confused. Take a look at, for decades, self-help books and literature have always been, bestsellers. I simply went onto the web the other day and looked at the New York Times bestseller list, and on the nonfiction paperback, there are 3 Outliers is by Malcolm Gladwell, and again, it's about being efficient and so forth. There's another one, Quiet. It's about introverts and how introverts, should behave and can behave and this and that and the other. There was another one, Thinking Fast and Slow, about how you think and so forth. Any time that you look at the bestsellers, anytime you walk into a bookstore, you're going to see self-help literature as a big thing. So that's one data point. But then let's get down into some polling data here. A Pew 2008 survey asked people about priorities, and being successful in a career is very important to me. Got 61% yes. And what's interesting is the highest proportion of people who said success in a career is important to me were people with incomes of under $30,000. That was 69%. Again, this is a very self-oriented culture in many ways. Let's continue down, look at some more data here. Let's take a look, and we're still in the goals section. Let's take a look at the self-interest of millennials. That is, young people who kind of were getting into college age around the turn of the century, into the 21st century, entering college. And by the way, I put my data source here, and I actually wrote it out for those of you listening on audio. This is data from the Cooperative Institute Research Program, which surveys freshmen, and they've been doing this since 1966. And they do a 1 to 5 scale, mostly, strongly disagree, somewhat disagree to strongly agree. So 5, things. And asked about how this generation compares to previous generations. The current generation, the millennialists, basically 49% strongly agreed that their generation is more interested in money and wealth than their parents' generation. Kind of interesting. This is their self-evaluation. Well, we seem to be much more interested in these things than our parents. Only 3% strongly disagreed. Here is the really startling information in terms of goals. And by the way, 272,000 students have been surveyed for this. Asked about what are their most important objectives, okay? I'm going to go to number 2 first. Being very well off financially, 74%. And that is up from, 56% in 1977. So there you see, literally over the last 3 decades, more and more young people say, I want to be financially successful. And by the way, you see other surveys that look at why kids go to college, and in the 60s, it was, I want to find myself and, sort of help society and all. And now it's like, I got to make money, okay? I want a career. Very interesting. One of the things that really startled me when I was looking at these data are raising a family ranked highest. 77% of kids going into college over the last couple of years have basically said raising a family is their most important objective, slightly above being prosperous. Now, by the way, you'll look at the data, you still see helping others has sort of steadily remained up there, 70%, okay? But the point is, you see a generation that's still very self-oriented in a good way. They want to be prosperous, and for those who think libertarians don't believe in family values, well, look at that. Isn't that interesting? Very interesting data. Let's go on and take a look at self-interest in terms of efficacy. And there's some good news there. If you look at, this is a Pew poll, by the way, and you look at, here we go, the question is, success is determined by outside forces, yes or no? Meaning, are we efficacious, or are we simply at the mercy of, you know, the zeitgeist? In the United States, 62% of people disagree with that, believing that we're simply determined by outside forces. And by the way, look at how that stacks up against other countries. The British, 55% disagree that we're simply determined by outside forces. In Spain, it's 47%, France, 43%. Very curiously, in Germany, 27% of people say would disagree with the notion that we're determined by outside forces. 72% of the Germans say, yeah, we're just all determined by outside forces. Yet they're the most prosperous country in Europe, which I guess means they're kind of, you know, they just sort of plod along, you know, unhappily in the face of adversity. And, you know, I could make slurs on the German people, but I'll not do that right now. I lived in Germany, by the way, so I mean, it's a nice country, but it's got a very curious culture. But the point is, Americans tend to believe that they are efficacious, that they can make a difference in their own lives. Let's go to another indicator here. What about optimism? Optimism is very important, by the way, and I could do a whole lecture on the importance of hope. There are actually surveys about people who have, you know, optimistic views and who are how successful they are. Well, to the question of over the next 40 years, are you optimistic or pessimistic about your own life and your own family? And today, 64% of Americans are optimistic. Now, unfortunately, that's down from 1999 when 81% of Americans were optimistic. But still, you know, 2/3 of Americans still tend to be optimists. Again, another good indicator. By the way, concerning whether they're optimistic about the country or not, it's still 61%. Well, 61% in 2010. I suspect if the survey were taken today, that might be a lot lower. But, you know, again, even about the future of the country, this is a Pew survey from 2010, Americans tend to be optimistic even about the country. So, a lot of good news here, folks. I also put in here about the good news in terms of scholarly interest. And for those of you who've come to some of these events or maybe heard some of the talks that I've given before, there's now a whole movement or a whole area of study trying to, first of all, saying that human well-being is the standard of good, morality, etc. It is scientifically measurable and understandable, and we can kind of have a science of well-being. And Michael Shermer, the Skeptic Society, is one who's written books on this. The famous atheist Sam Harris alienated himself from a lot of his fellow sort of, you know, liberal-ish atheist friends by writing books basically saying morality is an objective thing. There is an objective standard of morality. It's human well-being. That's pretty good too. They're very confused on it. I've written some reviews about those confusions, but the point is this, they're taking this seriously. In other words, they're not writing about altruism and, you know, how we have to, you know, as sort of a primary thing, though most of them still have altruism in their models. David Brooke, by the way, of the American Enterprise Institute has written serious work on this, Jonathan Haidt. You have a whole happiness industry, so to speak. And again, while I might disagree with particulars, the fact is, this is something that's taken seriously now by a lot of people, a lot of very thoughtful people. So, a lot of good news here. Now, there's also some bad news. We're still on our first factor about self-interest. Okay, is there bad news? Well, yeah, there is. I didn't take as much time because I've already given you a lot of bad news about stuff. But the appeal to self-sacrifice still is a very powerful one. Again, you hear politicians using it all the time. Obama sort of specializes in that kind of rhetoric. John McCain, talked about, the importance of doing something above yourself and beyond yourself. This rhetoric still is extremely powerful and still will stop people. They say, well, yeah, I know I'm pursuing my own happiness, but I know that society is very important, not in the sense that you want a society of other rational individuals, but that you have to sacrifice. That rhetoric still is very powerful. And the other thing, and again, this could be a topic of a whole lecture, despite all the good news I've given you about American attitudes, these views have not been integrated into politics and into how people vote, who they support, and again, even into a lot of the culture. Otherwise, they wouldn't be supporting the sort of politicians that they do. So that's why I say that people are very interested in their own lives and take their own lives as important, but they're kind of confused about it, and confused to the point that the politics do not reflect this underlying, very positive set of values that I've just outlined. Okay, let's go to the next indicator. Oops, is that the next one? Yeah, that's it. Okay, productive achievement. Okay, productive achievement, very important for the individual. How about our culture? How's it looking there? Well, productive achievement in an age when productive achievement is politically punished. Success in productive achievement is really the goal of the new entrepreneurial class. The folks who've gotten rich on the new technologies, communications technologies, and the like. I did a review recently of a book called Abundance by Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler. You can see it on our website. And in that book, and I talked a little bit about this last year, the authors document all of these new entrepreneurs and the wonderful things that they're doing. For example, Dean Kamen, who's the guy who invented the Segway that you see kind of running around the cities all the time. Well, he decided he wanted to see what he could do about clean water, because millions of children, mainly in Africa and poor places like that, die because of lack of clean water. So what did this inventor do? Well, normally to purify water, you have to have a humongous sort of system. And he managed to build a prototype of a system that can produce 250 gallons of clean water per day. The prototype cost $100,000. He figures the things can be produced for $5,000. It's the size of a small refrigerator. Now, $5,000 is still too much for a poor, starving person in Africa, but he's working with the Coca-Cola company to help distribute these things, to maybe allow like a village or something buy one of these things, collectively for the $5,000, something like that. So here's a new entrepreneur who's doing something that is good, it's creative. But here's the thing: if you look at these new entrepreneurs, I see three very important factors. First, a respect for reason and the power of the human mind to come up with something, the things that we're talking about. SpaceX, by the way, is another example of this. We'll hear Steve Davis a little later in this conference. These are people who understand the power of reason. These are people who are driven as individuals. They're the driving force. In other words, it's not social forces. It's that Dean Kamen just wants to do this thing. He's just so damned excited about this thing. He's going to do it, and boy, isn't this exciting. It's individual driven. And they're creators who love their work. And these are people who are, in fact, celebrated. I got the picture of Success Magazine for those of you listening on audio, and it's got a picture of Peter Diamandis on the cover. More good news there. Again, this is a Rasmussen poll. 68% of people asked said that rewarding hard work is a top priority, even if it leads to income inequality. And a gap between rich and poor. Very interesting. The notion that hard work and productive achievement is so important that, well, if there's some inequality there, so what? Everyone's going to be better off. That's from a Rasmussen survey. Another interesting survey, this is a Pew survey of 2012, asked people whether they admire rich people who get rich by working hard. And I italicized who get rich by working hard. 88% say yes, they do. And by the way, 72% say that the strength of the country is based primarily on the success of American business. That's a Pew survey as well. So in terms of what the culture, in a sense, is saying, or what the values are in terms of productive achievement, well, we got a lot of good stuff there, don't we? Well, as you suspected, we also have some bad stuff. First of all, many still make the social defense for productivity. In other words, rather than the self-interested defense, well, it helps society. Well, that's good. You know, we all are happy that our productive efforts help society. But again, if you take that as your standard, and that's why you're doing things, then you're basically letting yourself in on the trap of, well, I can't see how this is going to help society, so what you're doing is questionable. Okay? And of course, your concern should be whether it's helping you, not whether it's helping society, though you can't do, you know, most free market stuff without helping other people in some way. You've got to have customers, right? The biggest problem today, by the way, I see is the radical environmentalist dogma and this notion that the earth or Gaia is an entity with rights to be respected. And again, that's something that's that over the last 30 years has become so pernicious an idea that, you know, every day I can pull out examples from the news or whatever of people simply assuming that's the case and therefore saying, well, yeah, we have to cut back and we have to recycle and that sort of stuff, not because it makes economic sense, not because it actually helps human beings to be healthier. For example, let's not dump raw sewage into rivers. These are the kind of things where you have the Obama administration saying, let's kill the coal industry because we just don't like cheap energy. Because cheap energy allows people to do stuff, and people doing stuff, after all, anytime a human being does stuff, by definition, we interfere with Gaia, the goddess, and, you know, that is one of the most pernicious anti-productive, anti-humanist ideas that's in our culture today, and it offsets a lot of the good things I've just said. Okay. Let's go to the third factor we talked about, rationality. Reason is, reason is the way we have to discover the nature of reality and to guide our lives. How does the culture do there? Well, you'll notice instead of having the good news at the top, I put the bad news at the top. Uh-oh, things are going south here, folks. Bad news is that science, of course, and reason today are viewed with suspicion, especially compared to you know, the past. After all, technology, which is seen as sort of a reflection of science and being able to understand the world, is what has caused pollution and all those terrible things. You see in public discussions and so forth, feelings still put out as something that can trump reason. Yes, well, I know that this economic program, you know, will produce a lot of wealth, but and everyone will benefit, but some people are going to benefit even more. And I feel that that's unfair. I feel it. And so when you try to reason with people and say, yeah, but everyone will be a little bit better off, isn't that a good thing? Well, I just feel that, and that's, you know, again, in our culture today, instead of being laughed out of, you know, the hall, well, you know, your feelings, you know, if you have a problem with your adrenal gland, you know, go see a doctor or something. Instead, you know, that's considered something that can trump a rational argument. Of course, our schools are absolutely atrocious in teaching even the basics, to say nothing of critical thinking and how to reason. I always like to throw numbers out here, sorry. Before I do the numbers, I like to point out and remind people that a dumbed down population is absolutely necessary for statists. Remember the people we talked about in the first part of this talk who are doing all the terrible things in government? They require a dumbed down, stupid population. Because if people were actually thinking and were smart and knowledgeable and so forth, first of all, they wouldn't need a bunch of elite politicians to run their lives. And so I maintain that there's, you know, it's both the nature of the system and it's something that the system needs to support itself. People have to be stupid in order for statists and elitists to flourish maliciously, I would say. I mean, look at the self-delusion in today's world. How can you say that borrowing 40 cents for every dollar you spend can last? And, it's just appallingly, an appalling evasion of reality. Let me just move on here. I'm going to move on a little faster. Here we go. I always like to throw statistics in. Every president in a State of the Union address basically talks about the importance of education and spending on education. And I actually looked at the numbers here. And since 1989, Department of Education spending has gone up from $22.8 billion to $68.6 billion. Wow, it's almost tripled. Even if you adjust for inflation, it's gone up significantly. So how's that been working out at the federal level? Well, let's see. SAT scores, math scores have just inched up slightly over the last couple of decades. Verbal scores have actually gone down. And when Barack Obama made his State of the Union speech on Lincoln's birthday and announced the importance of education, only 9% of fourth graders on the day he was making that speech on Lincoln's birthday could actually identify a photograph of our 16th president and give 2 reasons why he was important. That's how our schools suck. And by the way, if you throw in state spending, which is where most education spending goes, it's just absolutely appalling. So in terms of reason, well, and how reason is faring in the culture, not very good. There is a little bit of good news. There's still an appreciation of reason among the technical class. You see that there's actually a market for it. I'm one of these people who love the teaching company courses. They make what, like I think it's $100 million in revenue each year? I mean, there's a market for that sort of thing. The growth of the skeptic movement in this country, one of the things they really are focusing on more and more is reasoning skills, teaching children how to think. There's a camp inquiry for those of you who might be interested in that sort of thing. And again, the same people who are looking at happiness are also looking at better ways to you got 5 minutes, I think, yeah. Looking at better ways to teach kids how to think critically. And I've done some lectures on that. So there is some good news there. Okay, now I'm down to the integrity and having a life philosophy point. And you see bad news is at the top again. Sorry about that, folks. And just to move on very quickly, because of everything I've said before, you would not expect that a lot of people would have good integrated philosophies of life, that it would be very confused, and that's in fact what we see, a lot of confusion sort of reinforced by culture. There used to be traditional paradigms, ways for people to think, but a lot of those paradigms, which were mixed bags to begin with, have broken down, and in fact, so what you see today is a lot of confusion about a lot of stuff. You don't see a whole, like in the past, you used to have something like more consistent philosophies. Marxists had a philosophy and a worldview. It was a wrong one, but it was some sort of attempt to have one. But you don't see, except for the environmentalist movement, which has a pernicious ideology, you don't see a lot of this, well, I have sort of a worldview and ideology. It's kind of a slapdash mess, and especially in politics. Is there good news? Did I put anything down good under that? Well, I think that there is a thirst for some sort of an integrated worldview, which brings us to objectivism, which I'm going to come to in just a moment here, in about 2 minutes, I think, which I have remaining. And finally, remember I talked about the 5th point under sort of true individualism concerning how we deal with others. Well, then if you start talking about justice and that sort of thing in society, this is very important to understand. In 2012, 66% of Americans said that they believe strongly or very strongly that there is a conflict between rich and poor. And that's up from 47% in 2009. In other words, Obama's, that's a Pew survey, by the way. In other words, Obama's appeal to envy really did work. People more and more feel, 2/3 of Americans feel that there is a conflict between rich and poor, that it's not a, some kind of a symbiotic relationship. Only 38% say that businesses and corporations, business corporations, strike a fair balance between making a profit and serving the public. That's a Pew survey. 2/3 believe that they don't. Now, of course, we would question the premise of the question, wouldn't we? that, well, wait a minute, is a business supposed to be serving the public? And after all, selling products is what they do. That's how they serve the public. So the question itself contains a contradiction, but the point is, look at the result. And by the way, that's a Pew survey. The Rasmussen survey said 36% view the economy as unfair in some way, or at least somewhat fair. Sorry, at least somewhat fair. 52% view the economy as unfair. Only 36% think that the U.S. economy is at least somewhat fair. That's, again, that's a Rasmussen poll. Here's another statistic. Remember we talked about 88% of people admire the rich who become rich by working for it? 67% disagree with I admire the rich if you don't add the and they worked for it. Rich people as such, no. People who work for it, they make this bifurcation. But again, it's kind of this weird set of contradictions. Do you think that the U.S. benefits from having rich people? 63% say yes. That's a Gallup poll. Very interesting. Just a few more data points here before I move to my conclusions. How important is it that the federal government increase opportunities for people to get ahead? 70% say it's very important. But what about reducing income inequality and the wealth gap by redistribution? Well, 54% disagree with that. So again, you see this very confused thing, but the fairness issue really is something that resonates with people. And it really is something that undermines all the other good things that I have talked about. Let's see here. I should go a little bit faster here. Hard work offers little guarantee for success. Poor people think that it offers little guarantee, but 71% of Americans think the poor are too dependent on the government. That includes 68% of people with incomes under $30,000. 70% think that struggling homeowners should downsize. But here, the final thing under this section, and then I'll kind of wrap up, take some time for some questions. Only 36% of Americans say the U.S. economy is a free market system. 34% say it's a crony capitalist system. 29% are not sure. So I've given all these statistics about how people think the economy is somehow fundamentally unfair, how businesses are somehow fundamentally not serving the public, and so forth. And I trace it to this fact that people are confused about what the hell is the system. Is it a free market system? Is it a crony capitalist system? This is really, I think, is key to this, why we have this situation, this final factor. Now, I'm going to sort of move on quickly here so we get to the Q&A. I wanted to say a few words, first of all, about living. We started off by asking, how do you as an individualist live in a society that's kind of somewhat messed up? And I've suggested, well, it's somewhat messed up, but not completely messed up. But let me give you a couple of quick bits here, and then we'll turn to questions. I want to emphasize the importance, as you as an individual, of thinking of your life as an entrepreneur, as if you were an entrepreneur of your own life. In fact, we have a little palm card that says exactly that. So if you want more details, read our palm card, or read David Kelly's wonderful pieces, even better. But an entrepreneur basically has a goal. An entrepreneur looks at sort of what are the materials I need to achieve my goals, should I bring them together, how do I meet all the uncertainties and challenges to make a profit. That's what an entrepreneur does, right? If you're an entrepreneur of your own, and they take responsibility, they know that I got to do it. I'm not sitting back simply collecting a salary from 9 to 5. I got to go out there and figure this stuff out and use my mind. That's what an entrepreneur does. Think of your life as your entrepreneurial opportunity, right? To look at it, to say, what do you need to live a happy life, and so forth, and put that first. And I think that's one of the ways that in a collectivist society, in a messed up society, you provide focus to yourself. But an entrepreneur inevitably starts bumping into government regulations and bad stuff. And at first they kind of try to deal with it as best they can, but at a certain point an entrepreneur says, wait a minute, I don't like this. And so I'm going to start questioning the government regulations that are getting in my way. An entrepreneur in life is going to question the cultural regulations, you might say. The stuff that I've just outlined, A lot of good stuff, but a lot of bad stuff. And you're going to find that in your life, trying to live a flourishing, prosperous life, that's what you're bumping into sort of as an entrepreneur of your own life. You're bumping into these cultural barriers to you living a good, happy life. And so think about it that way. You're part of society, but you should not be a social metaphysician. Okay, I want to conclude here and then go to some questions. I wanted to end by saying, what can we do to change then the society? And without going into more details, we can talk more about this at the Q&A. First of all, we need a radical, reason-oriented education revolution. I keep coming back and looking at my old speeches and saying, can I come up with something new? And I say, well, you know what? I was right when I said this a couple of years ago. And more I study it, the more and more I think about the importance of really understanding and revamping the education system and the way we think about education in this country. We need to mobilize the wealth creators. We need to change their consciousness. These people who I talked about, who are the new wealth creators, who love what they're doing and so forth, but they tend to be squishy liberals because a lot of these issues have not been put to them yet. We can put these sorts of things to them. You have to address the fairness issue. You have to address this issue that people don't understand, the difference between a real free market system and a crony capitalist system. We have to start raising people's consciousness about these issues. We have to present a compelling vision of the kind of society that we can have and will have if we embrace the right philosophy. And finally, you all are in Washington, D.C. Anyone listening to a tape or whatever of this, we're in Washington, D.C. today, but I'm saying you have to act locally. Much of attention is focused on Washington, D.C., but if you act like the Free State folks are doing in New Hampshire, if you act like some of the people are doing in the various locales, that's where you really can have an impact. So to conclude, an individualist, individualism is the philosophy that we should be following. We have a very mixed culture, but there's a lot of hope. Things look a lot better when you start drilling down beyond politics, but we still need to do a lot of work. So thank you for your attention, and look forward to, I think we have about 10 minutes for Q&A.
Is this on? Okay.
I think so.
I would like to ask you about your comment where you said that the schools were doing a horrible job teaching children. I'm a fourth grade teacher in New York, and I can tell you that the teachers in New York have been just totally oppressed by the government regulation coming down on us. Do you have any data that would support the fact, since No Child Left Behind, when you say schools are doing a horrible job, does it date back to that? I mean, can you state specifically that it comes down to government regulation?
Yeah, in several ways. I mean, this is a whole complex issue, and maybe next year I'll do a whole speech on education, because to me, I mean, more and more, by the way, you know, I've got skin in the game now, okay? This is not just me talking about abstract philosophy. You'll see my little 2.5-year-olds hopefully in a couple of days, and you know, I don't want to damn them to an education system that could warp their minds and their spirits. But no, this has been going on for well before the No Child Left Behind, as bad as that might have been. I'll say a few things. First of all, remember the whole nature of the education system. It's a state system, okay? You take a look at any other industry that's producing a good or a service, and there's lots of competition, right? And those that can't compete go out of business, but what ends up happening is, for example, you get, for those of you who are listening on a recording, I'm holding up a smartphone here, which 10 years ago no one knew what the hell this thing was, but competition means people are tripping over themselves to come up with something like this, right? But you don't have the kind of competition, you don't have, the customer, if the customer doesn't like the school, right? If I don't like the schools my kids are going to, well, they're not going to a school right now, we're going to homeschool them. But, the government's still going to take my money, and then if I want to go ahead and raise some extra money to send them to a private school, well, they'll allow me to do that. But part of it is that system where you don't have competition. I also think there are cultural issues involved as well. I mean, the current education system is really the Industrial Revolution model. It's the mass production model of education, okay? Where, it's like an assembly line. Everyone goes to, at 10 o'clock, we all go to social studies class, and then they move down the assembly line at 11 o'clock to math, and so on and so forth. And, there have been a lot of advantages to that system over the last couple of centuries, where we do have a more educated populace than, say, 2 centuries ago. But that's not how kids actually learn. There's been so much good work done. I mean, you can talk to Marcia Enright about this, who's here today, and others. There's been so much, and even in the last decade or so, on how kids really learn. And I can give you some examples offline of some really incredible stuff that's being done in education. So again, that's a whole area that's very, very important.
My question, in a way, sort of piggybacks off her question. I've had that argument a lot of times, and sometimes maybe I'm just a bad argumenter, but sometimes it's tough to get that across. Has there been a lot of work done? My question is essentially, at what time do you want to capture people to have that argument? Say, for example, a lot of companies spend a lot of money trying to get kids in school. I come from a place where there was a lot of indoctrination in the schools, and it pays off. So there's up to a certain age where people are more impressionable. With the goal of spreading individualism. How much work has been done for us to say, okay, let's spend this much effort and this demographic, or in schools or students. Apple spends a lot of money trying to get people to use iPads even now from early on, versus trying to catch them, let's say, mid-20s, 30s, and with a point of putting our efforts, our forces into those ranges. What would you say pays off more?
Well, I would say what pays off more is, and that's kind of what I'm advocating here, and again, you'll probably see me doing more of this sort of thing. The libertarian / objectivist movement kind of started with lots of college kids talking about these sort of things and reading Ayn Rand, and that's all great, and it's kind of focused at that level or older. We really do have to start focusing at, literally from the cradle on, because kids are impressionable. It's during those early years that they form, not only they form moral habits, they form intellectual habits. And again, that's why I put at the top of my list, on sort of how to create a second, a new enlightenment, that becomes the most important and most crucial thing that's going to pay off 20, 30 years from now. I would love to come up here, daughter up here 20 years from now. David would daughter up here and introduce me if you, I hope. And I would love to be able to stand here 20 years from now and basically say, guys, isn't it great? I remember, 20 years ago when I talked about this, and isn't it interesting that the college students coming in today, including my little ones and Aaron Day's little ones are running around here somewhere, I'm sure. Isn't it great to see them and their attitudes now, and how they're not subject to the pernicious nonsense, that we've seen a generation ago? You really have to start at that young an age, and that's where the revolution's going to come. I think we have time for maybe one more quickie. No, I'll try to be quick as well. Not my thing, but hey, there it is.
Well, I am a college student, and when you talked about being self-oriented, I thought that was really interesting, because I don't doubt that we live in a self-oriented society, but I think that self-orientation is very limited. When we talk about objectivism, a common term I hear is that Ayn Rand challenged people to be heroic. So where is that heroism in our society today? Because although we're self-oriented, I think that's become very limited throughout the years.
Oh, excellent question. We've done some very good work on that, by the way, about being the hero of your own life. You can take a look on our website. But, that's one of the things that's, I think, of Rand's greatest appeal, is that, heroes in the past, were not in novels were, men on horseback fighting great battles and, things like this. And one of the things she did in Atlas Shrugged is the heroes were businessmen and businesswomen who were creating a whole new industry and creating a bridge out of a new metal and these kind of things. I would say that some of the heroes today are the people who, like Steve Jobs, he was a squishy liberal, but he revolutionized the world. What a heroic effort that is. Being the hero of your own life, I mentioned pardon me, I hate to take my little children off the screen here, but, as they're so beautiful. But one of the things that, again, I just put this down for inclusiveness, but my point there, inspire with a compelling vision. And one of those compelling visions, and this kind of fits into your being, an entrepreneur of your own life, is being the hero of your own life. And what I find is that college students especially are looking for something. And again, I could cite lots of polling data beyond what I've done here about how they're open to this kind of thing. They don't want to think of, well, I'm in college now and life is grim and everything sucks and, my girlfriend or boyfriend doesn't like me anymore and da-da-da, That's not what they want. And that's something that objectivism as a philosophy uniquely can give. Libertarians are really great at, in terms of public policy, and I'm one of them, okay? But objectivism gives you this life philosophy and this life view, which was one of my points, that can inspire and that can cause people to, again, reorient their own lives. And again, you as a student, go out and do that. So anyway, I thank you all for your attention, and welcome to the event.